Viserys I Targaryen was not the strongest willed of kings, it must be said. Always amiable and anxious to please, he relied greatly on the counsel of men around him, and did as they bid more oft than not. The writings of Archmaester Galdane on King Viserys I, Fire and Blood, Heirs of the Dragon, a question of succession. There are so many reasons why the Dance of the Dragons happened, and countless characters you can level the blame at, to varying degrees. You in theory could go as far back as Aegon the Conqueror himself, for not codifying firm succession laws, which seems very short-sighted, given he set out to create the largest and most powerful dynasty Westeros had ever seen. Yeah, there is enough evidence to suggest that male preference primogeniture may have been his intent, but he took no steps to establish that as succession law. That means that other kings can kinda do what they want with succession without these laws to follow. But I don't think it's fair to blame Aegon for the mistakes his descendants would make. The most commonly cited person most at fault for the Dance of the Dragons is King Viserys I. Viserys broke centuries of precedent in naming Rhaenyra his heir, but given Daemon was the next best option, you can understand why he felt this might have been the correct course. The issue comes when Viserys marries Alicent Hightower and has several sons, Aegon most importantly being the eldest son, yet still sticking with Rhaenyra as his named heir. Now, this video isn't here to debate who had the better claim, Aegon or Rhaenyra, because they both do for very different reasons. I've made several videos on the matter, but the main issue here is it was abundantly clear to all of those at court that this issue of succession between Rhaenyra and Aegon was always going to cause the realm huge issues down the line. Yet Viserys, rather than address the hard truth of the matter, chose to bury his head in the sand, while the Blacks and Greens schemed and plotted. Hence why many people point the blame at Viserys for his inaction for the dance itself. There are several points at which the looming conflict could have been avoided, but for the sake of this video, I would argue it became most plain to see during the Driftmark incident of 120 AC, in which Daemon Targaryen loses his eye while fighting with Lucerys and Joffrey Velaryon, after he claimed Vhagar at the funeral of Rhaenyra Velaryon. Yes, the factions existed prior to this point. There was always a clear divide between Alicent and Rhaenyra, but it was this incident where both factions became entrenched, and a succession crisis upon Viserys' death was all but inevitable, and plain to see for everyone apart from King Viserys himself. Now, prior to 120, there were certainly several things Viserys could have done to soften the animosity between the Blacks and the Greens, and nip the situation in the bud. And while these ideas often do get suggested among the fanbase, each has a huge downside that kind of explains why they never actually happened. For example, Otto Hightower's suggestion of marrying Aegon to Rhaenyra. First off, the age gap is a bit of an issue. 10 years might not sound a lot, but especially when the elder party is female, it certainly can be. So let's say Rhaenyra and Aegon are betrothed to each other. You then have to wait for Aegon to come of age for the marriage to make sense. Let's say the match is made when Aegon is born. You would reasonably then have to wait till at a minimum he was maybe 12 or 13, if not older. I'm saying 13 because that was the age in which Alicent Targaryen was when she married King Jaehaerys. And even then Jaehaerys felt she was too young to consummate the marriage, so waited till their second marriage in 51 AC to do so. So using that as a baseline, Aegon and Rhaenyra would marry in 120, when Rhaenyra was 23, which while not old, is quite late during this kind of time period, the kind of setting Westeros is. That is assuming they marry when Aegon's even 13, and not when he comes of age a few years later. Hell, a lot can happen in 13 years, and with such a light line of succession, creates the risk of instability. You also have the issue of who would be the ruling party in this case. Would Aegon, given his gender, be the ruling king, and Rhaenyra his consort? Or vice versa? Something tells me that both Viserys and Rhaenyra wouldn't be thrilled by that, given what happened in the real timeline. And there's no way Otto or Alicent agrees to this match if Aegon is not the senior party. So a marriage between them isn't the silver bullet it seems. He had ruled for 26 years, reigning over the most prosperous era of the Seven Kingdoms, preceding within it the disastrous decline of his house, and the death of the last dragons, the writings of Maester Yandel and King Viserys I, the world of ice and fire, the Targaryen kings, Viserys I. Prior to 120 AC, the often cited idea is that Viserys uses his power as king to do something none of his predecessors had done before. Even the great Jaehaerys, whom knew the dangers of a succession crisis well. Viserys could have codified a law, formalizing how the Iron Throne succession plan works. But herein lies some huge issues. Firstly, if Viserys attempted to codify anything other than male preference primogeniture, there would have been a huge backlash, not just within the small council, but up and down the realm, with such a law being enforced, potentially causing several succession disputes within the great houses. The concept of male preference primogeniture is baked into thousands of years of Westerosi history and culture. The lesson here is just because the king has the power to decree something, doesn't mean they actually have the power to do it, when the idea itself is extremely complicated and not necessarily workable as it appears on the surface. But it gets even more complicated. Viserys' claim to the throne largely is supported by the ruling of the Great Council of 101 AC that backed his claim to the throne over that of Rhaenyra Targaryen. Near on a decade prior, it was Rhaenyra's mother, Princess Rhaenys, at the centre of the succession crisis when her father died on Tarth in 92 AC. She was her father's only child, yet Jaehaerys named his second son Prince Balon the Brave as his heir, the father of Daemon and Viserys, passing over Rhaenys and her unborn child, by in part largely due to her gender. Given Jaehaerys' preference was clearly male preference primogeniture, Rhaenyra Targaryen's claim in 101 AC is put aside for two reasons. He is a babe, while Viserys a grown man, and the fact his claim comes via his mother Rhaenys, while Viserys comes via his father Balon. So here is Viserys' dilemma. If he changes the succession law to make Rhaenyra his legal heir, not just his named heir, he inadvertently brings into question his own claim to the throne, weakening his influence and power at its very foundation. Doing so would create a dangerous situation, with now the powerful and now dragon-riding House Targaryen, and Rhaenys by extension, back in contention. So yeah, it's not as clear-cut as it really seems. So it's just after 120 AC. Aemon's lost his eye and tensions are at all-time high between the Blacks and the Greens. You now have 9 years to sort the situation out or the dragons will dance. You are Viserys. What do you do? It's clear, naming Rhaenyra your heir isn't going to work. Codifying laws to make her your legal heir would also be a constitutional mess and political suicide. Having lords swear an oath isn't going to solve the issue either. Lords die, young sons rise. Sons whose very claim to their seat might be brought into question by an elder sister. Frankly, the sheer existence of Aegon, Aemond and Daemon is a huge problem. An idea I've seen bandied about is if Viserys is so intent on Rhaenyra being his named heir, and his sons are the issues, why not just remove the issue by removing the sons? Of course I'm not saying Viserys kill his sons. Rather they become maesters or take the black as a form of abdication. But there is a few clear reasons why this is not going to work. Firstly, you can't really force Aegon, Aemond and Daemon to take the black or become a maester. And frankly, Alicent, Otto and House Hightower isn't going to let that happen. But at least when it comes to maesters, there does seem to be a way to get them out of their vows. We know that King Jaehaerys offered his son, Maester Aegon, the throne prior to the Great Council. And we know Maester Aemon II was offered the throne after the death of King Maekar, but like Aegon, refused. So say a son of Viserys becomes a maester. There does seem like there is a way with the right motivation they could still claim the throne. The Night's Watch on the other hand is another matter. The vows seem a bit more locked down. Once you're in, However, who knows what will happen with Jon Snow come the Winds of Winter, if his story is anything like his show counterpart. We also know that when Robb Stark debated with Catelyn the idea of naming Jon his heir, he seemed confident given enough men or resources or equipment were promised to the Watch that Jon could be released and be named his heir, should the situation arise. So while we have yet to see this in practice, who knows what's actually mechanically possible. While marriages could not have solved the Aegon-Rhaenyra situation due to the age gap and who would be the ruling party, maybe other marriages are the key to avoiding the dance. In House of the Dragon, we see there were even attempts to do this that obviously did not work. If you cannot make a match between the elder generation, why not try it with the younger? Like House of the Dragon, you could propose a match between Viserys, Rhaenyra's eldest son and heir, and Rhaenyra Targaryen, thus bringing the blacks and the greens together. You could also marry Aegon to either Baelor or Rhaenyra. You are further building bridges between the blacks and the greens, specifically the Velaryon and Hightower elements, while building bonds between the greens and specifically Daemon Targaryen. The issue is by this time, especially after Aemond loses his eye on Driftmark, both sides are well too entrenched into their positions. Part of the Green philosophy centres around the claim their method of succession is the true method, that male preference primogeniture is the true method of determining a succession. While yes, your blood via Rhaenyra ends up on the throne, Jace would still be the ruling monarch with Rhaenyra as the consort. Is this going to be enough for the likes of Otto and Alicent to back down from their position? Also, Aegon is still going to be an issue in this scenario. Even if the Greens concede their position and agree to these marriages, there's still going to be a significant number of lords and houses who might view Aegon as the rightful king. There will always be that lingering question. The minute there's unrest in the realm, people could look to the likes of Aegon as a solution. Hell, in this circumstance, Daemon, if the match is made prior to Daemon's marriage to Rhaenyra, might even back Aegon if it meant his blood via Baelor or Rhaenyra sits on the throne. It might accidentally make the Green faction more powerful. So yeah, when these matches are made, there is also some huge issues. While the matches do lessen the risk, these marriages don't fully fix the situation because both sides are coming at this from their own ideological positions. There is also a question of what you do with Aemond, Lucerys, Joffrey and Daeron, and depending on when these negotiations happen, Aegon III and Viserys II. I doubt Aemond's going to be happy playing nice with Lucerys. That tension is always going to be there. Maybe if you foster the likes of Lucerys and Daeron together, you could build relationships there. Again, the existence of Aegon III and Viserys II, depending on the time frame of these matches, also needs to be thought about, as do complicated matters with them both being the sons of Rhaenyra, the named heir, and Daemon, who many view as Viserys' legal heir when he named Rhaenyra his named heir. So both Aegon III and Viserys both have strong claims to the throne as well. My theory is, with such a muddled mess of claims, not just claims but strong claims, no matter what you do here, there's a strong chance of a generation or two of chaos and civil war, regardless, as outside forces and lords try to use this messy situation to advance themselves and to try and get their own blood on the throne. No matter what matches you make, it all ends in a chaotic mess. Even if we put aside the possible marriages and the what-ifs, there is one thing Viserys should have done the moment Rhaenyra was old enough. From the age of 16, we know that Rhaenyra spent most of her time at her own seat on Dragonstone, away from the drama of court in the Red Keep. Many speculate to avoid that very drama. The issue is, this left the Greens, Otto and Alicent, to fill the small council and court with men that share their position and allow the Greens to make friendships and alliances needed to maintain power. Rhaenyra, named heir or not, isolated on Dragonstone away from court, was not able to build these kinds of relationships or political credibility, which are the two things she would need to work doubly hard at given her gender. It means when Viserys does die in 129, the Greens' firm control over King's Landing, allowing the Green Council to act the way they did and crown Aegon before Rhaenyra even knew her father was dead. Viserys should have kept Rhaenyra close, named her his hand, and made her an active part of ruling the realm, letting her build these relationships, meaning when Viserys did die, she's right there ready to step into that power vacuum. With a small council and court, she grew and chose whom were loyal to her. Aegon existing would have still been a huge problem. The Green faction would still exist. but Rhaenyra would actually be in a much better position to take the throne than she was in the real timeline. I think this is a classic case of Viserys choosing the path of least resistance, trying to keep everyone happy, when sadly that's just not going to happen. The truth of the matter is the dance happened because of choices that King Viserys made of his own free will and could not be compelled to renege on. At any point before his death, when seeing the coming inevitable conflict and bloodshed that it would surely bring, he could have just named Aegon heir and be done with it. But for his own personal preference, he was always going to stick with Rhaenyra. In the TV show, Viserys has a much clearer motivation for sticking by Rhaenyra, given his role in Aemma Arryn's death. His naming of Rhaenyra is fueled in part due to his grief and guilt at what happened, and as well as anger at Daemon for his callous attitude to the death of Aemma and baby Baelon. It's clear in the show that these things really did stick with Viserys his whole life. The book is a lot less clean cut. We don't know why Viserys stuck so strongly by his choice to name Rhaenyra his heir, but it's not hard to infer that some kind of similar reason as the show could be a factor. I think that actually sums up why Viserys failed as a king and why so much of the dance actually falls on him. If he was so intent on Rhaenyra being his heir, he should have never remarried in the first place. Of course, there's going to be a succession dispute with your new wife's children, especially if you marry a young and promising woman from a powerful house like Alicent Hightower. Viserys really did think he could have his cake and eat it too. Yes, you can make the argument that the king needed to remarry for political reasons, but even then, there's no reason that outside of the bedding, you actually have to carry on consummating the marriage. In the real world, there are some kings who took mistresses for this exact reason, to not further complicate the line of succession. But given it's stated Viserys fell in love with Alicent, the writing was on the wall. Some fans take this a bit further and say Viserys should have just put his hurt feelings aside and named Daemon his heir after the death of Aemma and baby Baelon, then married Daemon and Rhaenyra together. On paper, problem solved. And yeah, this may have been the only circumstance I can see that could 100% avoid the dance. The argument here is Viserys should have acted as a king first and set his own feelings aside. But I think the fact that Viserys reacted emotionally to these kinds of conflicts is really his defining character trait. So yeah, I think unless Viserys was willing to act drastically outside of who we know his character to be, I can't see a way the Dance of the Dragons can 100% be avoided by political means. It really was a situation of his own making, by the choices he willingly made, and the only man who could alter any of that was Viserys himself.